Well, thank you, all the speakers and the respondents. I'm very happy to announce to the audience that was quiet until now that we now have 10 minutes for Q&As, burning questions in this burning issue. So, it's a bit difficult to see, but please speak into the microphone so we can translate. Please say your name and who you're addressing the question to. He needs a mic. Unfortunately, we can't hear them. I think that there's a lack of balance between the final results of using military force and the final results of sanctions. And I think, and I'm asking, and I don't understand, why the weight of the sanctions doesn't get much more attention in all the discussions, what to do with the sanctions, because my assumption is that economic sanctions have an immediate impact on the entire population. And they don't bring about what Meir Dagan said, creating a motivation after the bomb to continue to develop, because economic, very severe sanctions, it's not a question before elections or after the elections in the American side. Americans have a discussion about before elections about using military force, not about the economic sanctions. And my bottom line, there's a lack of a balance which is not clear to me between the impact of using military force, what where people are pushing towards, and the use of economic sanctions that I think can give more than using military force.
Is this on? Oh, sorry. So I think it's a very important point you raise. And you know, I think the theory of the case, if you will, with regard to sanctions is that the only way that negotiations will work, ultimately, is if the Iranian regime feels under such pressure that they have to prioritize regime survival over their pursuit of nuclear weapons. You have to separate those two objectives. The theory of the sanctions is that if they become crippling enough, they are so threatening they become threatening to the regime's ability to actually maintain its survival, maintain control, maintain stability in society. And then they have to choose between, calming things down and trying to survive, or continuing to pursue their nuclear weapons. And I think that's our experience before, when in 2003, when we have intelligence that suggested they stopped their weaponization efforts, it was because the regime felt under threat because of the Gulf War. This is a different way to create that kind of pressure and that kind of calculus for the Iranian leadership. Will it be enough? We don't know. But I think at a time when we're for the first time about to sanction any financial institution that does business with the Central Bank of Iran, and we're going to sanction oil products so that the Iranians will not be able to sell their oil, and that may stop them from even pumping oil. That is a totally new ball game in terms of the sanctions, and we owe it to ourselves to see what the implications, how that plays out. And that will start in July, early July, and we need to give it a little time to see how that plays out and see if we get the intended effect in terms of the state of mind with which Iran approaches the negotiating table and whether they're willing to get serious about putting the kind of measures in place to constrain their program.
Amos, I think you're right. We could have done a lot of the things that we're doing now 2 years ago, and in talks there's no good explanation why they didn't detach the Iranians from the clearing system in the banks. I mean, this is something that they could have done. You cannot say how it separates between the good ones and the good guys and the bad guys, but it jeopardizes the economy. I know this argument, but I think it derived from reasons of lack of will, because people didn't want to invest in it. There were all sorts of considerations and prices, something that didn't add to the feeling that you're not alone in this issue. Let's call it this way. And you cannot blur it. I am a staunch supporter of relations with Americans, I tell you, and there's a long list of possible targets in insurance and in shipping. There's some countries that we know, they help Iran to circumvent, for example, the Indians, from India, the Turks. I'm not saying because of the Turks, because of their verdict. It's not. I'm not afraid of them. But we all know it. And the Turks are also vulnerable. You know, if you ask me, I think the problem is that there's nobody except for Israel that gets up in the morning and thinks Iran, and what do we do when there are no sanctions? Really, sincerely. You see Sarkozy. Look, Sarkozy, for example, he was very vociferous regarding Iran. Yes, 1% of oil, whatever, but look at other countries in Europe. They're not very happy with these sanctions. There's some real damage to the economy of those countries. So there are a lot of rhetorics, but there's a difference between that and other things. So that's why this is realpolitik. People say, but it's not happening. I think that you're right. We could have done it before, but I say it's not too late. This is the point. It's not too late even now, because as you said, the Iranians are vulnerable. The economy is problematic, and what really can happen is that in the entire strategy, it's better to do whatever of bombing them or getting a bomb here. But I think there are also inner considerations. That's my only explanations. Every player, one by one, you can take every country. And I think that your statement that it wasn't because of internal interests of some of the players, I don't think you're right. 2012 was an election year in half of the world. It still is. And some of the considerations of the players regarding the sanctions was also looking at their own inner economic interests. And that's the reason why they didn't go further regarding the sanctions. I think it was a mistake, but it still be amended. That's why I said Israel should concentrate on an effort to convince everybody, especially those who don't want to see the other option, to do more. And I argue that there's still time, even from the point of view of Israel, and in that you have to concentrate your efforts. Amos, sanctions is very complicated, just as attack. I'll give you 5 reasons why sanctions did not achieve until today what they should have. First of all, there was the argument that Dagan said against the attack. If we impose sanctions, the regime is going to strengthen. The people will stand behind the regime. Until 2009, it was very strong. But I think after the demonstrations in 2009 in Tehran, it's much weaker, but there's still people who still use it. Second thing, very important, sanctions today in the international administration go through the Security Council. In the Security Council, there were 2 countries that any level of sanctions, they diluted it up to a level that the Iranians didn't even notice it. China and Russia as countries that did not allow to impose sanctions. That was very significant. The third thing are the prices of oil. There's a direct connection between sanctions and prices of oil. And until the Saudis woke up and said, look, friends, we're going to fill whatever the sanctions will take from the international oil market, there was a tendency not to impose sanctions because of the prices of oil. Second thing also has to do with the United States. The elections in the States are very impacted by the sanctions. There's nobody who can win the elections in the States if the price of a gallon of oil, of gasoline is $5, $6, $7. They don't win the elections. Finish. That's why even the administration in the United States did not run to impose sanctions. The ones who pushed them were surprisingly the Europeans. They understood that the Iranian missiles are already reaching the European range, and they even impacted the administration with the help of the Congress. But the administration would have wanted strong sanctions, but only after November. It's not in vain that they gave the right explanation. In order that the sanctions be global and include Japan, Australia, and South Korea, you need time to prepare it. And this time, surprisingly enough, was until the elections.
I have to rise to the bait. A couple of points. First of all, there are people other than Israelis who do wake up every morning worrying about this problem. And the U.S. has conducted an intensive shuttle diplomacy to every country that we have found to be trying to circumvent their responsibilities under the sanction regime. And we've, whether, I won't name names for not embarrassing, but we have made it an issue in our bilateral relations with many key countries to get them to get on board. Secondly, the sanctions that are really biting go way beyond what was agreed in the Security Council resolution. It's what the U.S. has imposed, it's what the EU has imposed, and we've gotten others to impose. On the price of oil, the real thing that drives up the price of oil is worry about conflict. If the sanctions are seen to be working, that doesn't have the same effect, especially because we've worked with the Saudis and others to try to provide alternative sources of supply for those countries that are weaning themselves off of Iranian oil. So again, I wanted to put those points of clarification on the table.
Thank you all. Our time is up. I think it was a fascinating panel. Thank you all the speakers.